We were out there. We spent the entire day out with my boss. And that is exactly why I can tell you the water conditions were nothing like what he claimed they were. Even though I was navigating a much larger boat compared to their tiny 8-foot little dinghy. But it was not rough out there. We were sitting right in that inlet current, man. You really have to trust me on that. I used to train and practice swimming there. There is absolutely no current like that. Based on where their boat actually was, to claim they reached that anchorage? Yeah. It is roughly 3.5 miles away. Would it really have taken them 9 hours to drift all that way? Absolutely not, right? Especially with the wind blowing? I swam that distance in 2 hours. What? I am a swimmer. Yes, we did a swim up there, all the way from Marsh Harbor to that very Abaco Inn. You actually swam that in 2 hours? 2 hours and 18 minutes, yes. This was the exact time that Brian and Lynette Hooker supposedly walked out of the Abaco Inn, where they spent most of the day drinking and having a great time. Simply living and enjoying life. The clock read 7:30 p.m. It is like you are out in the wild, deep ocean. So you do not believe there is any possible scenario where everything he says could actually be true. No, you do not believe he couldn't reach her, or that the current and wind blew them away from each other. Believe that? Absolutely not. A local boat captain who was out on those exact same waters at the very moment Brian Hooker claims the seas were rough, causing his wife to bounce out of their dinghy and get swept away. Forever, insists that things did not happen the way Brian describes them. Captain Ronnie Duncan himself, a seasoned mariner who grew up in these waters, who has piloted vessels throughout the Abaco Islands for decades, and who swam the exact same distance Brian claims took 9 hours to drift in just 2 hours and 18 minutes, looked very closely at the weather, studied the local map, closely analyzed the whole story, and summed it up as bogus. An investigative journalist who has been covering the Lynette Hooker disappearance from the very moment it broke, traveled directly to the Bahamas to retrace every single route Brian insists he took on the fateful night his wife vanished. She flew first from Fort Lauderdale to Nassau, then from Nassau to Marsh Harbor, and then chartered a local captain's boat directly across the Sea of Abaco to Elbow Key, the 6-mile barrier island in the northern Bahamas where Lynette was last seen alive. Once she arrived, she hired a local captain who knows every single mooring, every hidden channel marker, and every single current pattern in these tricky tropical waters, setting out to resolve the many troubling questions that Brian Hooker's narrative has raised since the night he first spoke to the Royal Bahamian Police Force. And everything she uncovered there on the ground, the distances, the weather, the local geography, and the direct testimony of a local man who was sailing those exact same waters at that very hour on that same night, directly contradicts Brian Hooker's account at almost every turn. Brian Hooker was eventually released from police detention in Freeport, located on Grand Bahama Island, after his 72-hour hold expired with no charges filed. His defense attorney, Terrell Butler, kept pressuring local authorities all day long. That 72-hour extension, which expanded his original 48-hour detention, finally ran out at 7:20 p.m. exactly. And he walked right out free. His 46-foot catamaran, Soulmate, is still tied to a mooring ball over in Marsh Harbor, about 100 miles away from Freeport. Bahamian police detectives actually boarded the vessel the very morning the reporter arrived, with half a dozen officers searching the yacht for clues. Another sailor anchored on a nearby mooring ball spotted the heavy police presence. They showed up this morning, searched the place, and climbed on board. The boat is locked up tight, completely abandoned since Brian was taken into police custody. And by the time we arrived, suspect Brian Hooker was still stuck in Freeport, cut off from his only remaining home. We were on the water, working all day with my boss. So I can tell you firsthand that the sea conditions were nothing like his story. Even considering I was in a larger vessel compared to their tiny 8-foot dinghy. But the water was not rough enough to knock someone overboard like that. And if something did happen that fast, she would have been swept away by the current instantly. But believe me, I used to train and practice swimming in those exact waters. There is absolutely no such current. Strong currents only happen when you have two islands squeezing together to form a narrow gap, which forces the water to rush through. But out here, there is nothing. A local captain who spent his childhood swimming these waters and trained in the exact spot where Lynette allegedly vanished under a deadly, powerful tide, rejected the story with the absolute confidence of a man who knows this ocean by heart. Severe currents only build up when land masses form a tight channel that forces the water to accelerate. It acts like a funnel, squeezing immense volumes of water through a very restricted space. But in the open bay where the couple anchored their yacht just outside White Sound, no such channel exists. There is no bottleneck. No dangerous riptides exist there. No rushing water could possibly drag two skilled swimmers apart, dragging one victim down forever while the husband spends 9 agonizing hours drifting to a point the captain calculates as nearly 3.5 miles away. The charter captain was navigating these seas on April 4th, the very night the tragic disappearance supposedly took place. He and his mate, OJ, had spent the entire day sailing with their employer, hopping across the Sea of Abaco. They finished around 7:15 p.m., just 15 minutes before Brian alleges he and his wife left the local inn to row back to their boat. The veteran sailor detailed the local sea conditions with absolute authority, like a local who needs no forecast to read the ocean's mood. The waves were not 2 to 3 feet high. It wasn't rough. Certainly nothing that could toss a grown adult out of an 8-foot inflatable boat, especially one running on a tiny electric motor that barely travels faster than a slow walk. The waves were barely 1 foot, maybe hitting 2 occasionally. And our investigative reporter verified this claim firsthand while standing on Elbow Key, watching the calm waters ourselves. Weather conditions had been similar all week, and the gentle waves looked nothing like the violent seas Brian described. On a recorded call, Brian actually told his friends waves were only 2 to 3 feet. He claimed he lost sight of Lynette because her head kept slipping beneath the swells. The captain shut down that claim without a single moment of hesitation. That is complete nonsense. You are not out in the wild open ocean. You are floating in the Sea of Abaco, a very calm, sheltered stretch of water between the outer barrier islands and mainland that never sees the rough conditions. Brian described, unless there is a massive storm or a violent northeaster hitting the area. On April 4th, there was absolutely neither. If you want to see what our reporter uncovers when she retraces the entire route tomorrow, make sure you subscribe right now, because every single update in this mystery completely changes what we thought we knew. From where the vessel actually was to that anchorage they claimed to be in? Yeah, give or take about 2.5 miles. Would it really take 9 long hours to drift that entire distance? No way, right? Especially with the wind. Look, I swam that distance in 2 hours. Seriously? I was a competitive swimmer. Yeah, we ran a charity swim-a-thon from Marsh Harbor right over to that Abaco Inn. You actually swam that in 2 hours? Exactly 2 hours and 18 minutes. And he is seriously claiming that his dinghy took almost 9 hours, from 7:30 at night until 4 in the morning. Exactly. That makes no sense. You are totally right. With that wind, with that current pushing them, that is absolutely right. A current, or a wind powerful enough to drag Lynette away. Now, listen closely to this. See my compass here? The wind is coming mostly from the easterly quadrant. Those winds were blowing from the east almost all week. 3.5 miles. A regular human being swam that entire distance in just over 2 hours. Yet Brian Hooker insists that his small dinghy, with the easterly wind blowing directly behind him, giving a steady push, along with a current he described as strong enough to sweep his wife out to sea, somehow took 9 hours to travel that exact same stretch of water. The numbers do not add up. They do not come close to making sense. If the wind was powerful enough to tear Lynette from the vessel so fast that Brian could not get to her, or even see her, despite his background as a Marine and his experience as a skilled swimmer and scuba diver, then those same gusts would have blown his small boat across those 3.5 miles in no time. The captain double-checked his compass during our interview. Winds had been blowing mostly from the east all week, creating a steady force that would have pushed Brian's dinghy along, straight from the Abaco anchorage right toward Marsh Harbor. With wind assistance and constant wave motion, even a drifting dinghy with a dead engine would cross that distance faster than any human swimmer. Not 4 times slower. That heavy wind would act as a massive booster, not a barrier. Besides, 9 hours of drifting in winds that powerful? To tear 2 people apart forever would have blown the dinghy many miles past Marsh Harbor. Not left it at the Calcutta Creek boatyard, a mere 3.5 miles away. The local geography creates massive issues. Right between the anchorage, where their yacht lay anchored, and the Calcutta Creek boatyard, where Brian claims he finally drifted ashore, you will find an island named Lubber's Quarters. If Brian really drifted from that anchorage toward Marsh Harbor, he had to pass right by Lubber's Quarters, a physical island with a shoreline, solid land, a safe place to stop and get help, instead of drifting blindly through the dark for 9 long hours. The local captain asked the exact question any experienced sailor would. How do you miss Lubber's Quarters entirely? How do you float right past an island and not beach your dinghy to search for help? Why keep floating right past land when you are supposedly desperate to find emergency help for your missing wife? So, how do you completely ignore everything that went down out there with your wife and say she vanished? But how do you float past Lubbers, only to end up over here on the main shore at Calcutta Creek, which is a busy boatyard? Calcutta Creek. Where exactly would he have come ashore? Point to where his landing site was. Right here. This is the spot. The official police report says he hit land 9 hours later. Is all that white space water? Yes, it is. He would have crossed those shallow waters, hit the beach, and then walked across the yellow area through the woods? That is just dry dirt land. Exactly. That is how the Garmin GPS displays it. And he claimed he struggled through the woods. But I have no idea which woods, because a security guard at the boatyard spotted him. There are no actual woods at Calcutta Creek, because once you land, it is purely a boatyard. The area is fully paved, with boats, tons of boats, and a paved road. There are simply no woods. Brian claims he trekked through harsh terrain and thick brush to seek assistance after hitting the shore. But the entire Calcutta Creek area is an active boatyard. It is paved, with boats parked everywhere. There's a main road. A security guard working the facility supposedly saw Brian show up. If Brian landed at Calcutta Creek and his own story places him right there, his claims of walking through deep woods and rugged terrain simply do not match the physical reality of that location. A boatyard is not the wild. It is pure infrastructure, filled with signs of civilization. And if a guard was close enough to spot Brian arriving at the scene, finding help did not require a trek through any woods. Help was right there, and if Lynette went into the water, the blowing wind direction, blowing mostly easterly all week, would have pushed her remains straight toward Lubber's quarters or back toward the western shore of Marsh Harbor. The captain stated it very clearly. Her remains should have been easily located. They would have washed up on some shoreline. Boaters crossed that exact area every single day, traveling to work, heading ashore, or moving between islands. Someone would have spotted something. Some trace surely would have turned up. The captain pointed out that when someone drowns in these shallow waters, a body does not simply vanish. The wind always pushes it to shore. Eventually, the ocean tides washed it ashore. With so many boats passing through daily, eyes are always watching the water. And yet, Lynette has still not been found. No sign of her body, no clothes, nothing at all except that Apple Watch found on the sand, along with the life jacket search and rescue teams located. This was the life ring Brian claims he threw to Lynette, found but leading to a total dead end. So, if the couple left the Abaco Inn at 7:30, spending maybe 10 or 15 minutes in their dinghy before she went overboard, to be honest, it probably wasn't even that long. They never actually made it back to the soulmate, even though that short trip back to the yacht should only take 10 to 15 minutes. This means it was likely around 7:40 when he claims she slipped into the water. At that hour, there would still be 20 minutes of light left to spot someone floating. We are talking 20 full minutes of remaining twilight. A reporter stood on Elbow Cay at 7:30 p.m. local time, matching the precise moment Brian says they departed the Abaco Inn, to document the exact level of daylight. Dusk was falling. The sun had dipped below the horizon, but the sky remained gray, meaning you could still clearly see the water and easily spot a person floating on the surface of the sea. Only by 7:58 p.m. did complete darkness set in. But during that window from 7:30 to 7:58, you had nearly 30 minutes of usable twilight. Any experienced boater knows this level of light means it is time to turn on navigation lights, and high time to be making your way back to your yacht. But it is certainly not dark enough to hide someone floating in the water right next to you. Brian claims they departed at 7:30. That dinghy ride to their boat should have taken 10 to 15 minutes. If Lynette fell overboard at some point along the way, say around 7:40, there were still 20 solid minutes of visible light left in the sky. That was 20 minutes where her husband Brian, a highly trained former Marine and skilled scuba diver, could have spotted her and jumped straight into the water. He easily could have reached her in those calm, one-foot seas described by the local captain, maintaining constant visual contact while screaming out for help from any of the other boats anchored nearby in the harbor. Yet Brian claims she vanished instantly, dragged away by a powerful ocean current. He insists her head kept slipping out of sight, constantly swallowed up by rough 2 to 3 foot waves. But the sea captain on those same waters, at that exact moment, insists those waves did not exist. The reporter also pointed out a key detail about the dinghy. It completely lacked running lights. Most small 8-foot tenders do not. And in the Bahamas during early April, daylight fades so rapidly by 7:30 p.m. that any responsible boater would already be heading home. Brian and his wife had been sailing together for over 10 years. They knew the dangers of navigating a tiny, dark boat after the sun went down. They knew their time was running out. Still, Brian asks us to believe that 2 highly experienced sailors, one of those men was a Marine, the other was a strong swimmer raised on Michigan lakes. Yet they decided to sail through fading twilight in a vessel with 0 working lights. And yet we are told conditions were mild enough to spend the entire afternoon drinking and partying on Elbow Key, but somehow rough enough to throw a passenger right out of a tiny boat, barely moving faster than a casual stroll. The yacht named Soulmate still sits on its mooring in Marsh Harbor. Local detectives continue to search the quiet vessel. A witness anchored nearby confirmed that the boat seems completely locked up, saying nobody has been on board, though several police officers were seen earlier searching the boat. Our reporter actually spotted the police patrol boat docking at the pier, with its blue lights still flashing after coming back from the yacht. The Royal Bahamas Police Force is still actively investigating, repeatedly visiting that eerie ghost ship floating in the harbor, shut up tight, with absolutely nobody on board. Tomorrow, our team plans to retrace the exact path starting at the Abaco Inn, where Brian and Lynette spent those final hours together, traveling right through the White Sound Channel, moving past the quiet spot where their yacht sat, right outside the shallow channel in the calm waters of the Sea of Abaco. She is going to interview the staff working at the restaurant that afternoon. Eyewitnesses who might have noticed how the couple was acting and their drinking, their heavy mood, seeking clues about any potential arguments or tension before they stepped into that tiny 8-foot dinghy, heading toward a yacht they would never actually reach. She has located their exact anchor spot now. She knows the precise distances and how dark it got. She knows exactly what the water looks like at 7:30 p.m. off Elbow Key, because she stood right there at 7:30 p.m. to film it. We asked Captain Ronnie the single most critical question in this entire investigation. Is there any possible way that Brian's version of events is actually true? That he simply could not reach Lynette? Did the strong winds and currents really pull them apart? Were the waves so high he lost sight of her? And did he really drift for 9 hours across 3.5 miles of open ocean? Was he truly powerless to save her? The local captain answered without a moment's hesitation, without holding back, and without the careful dodging that television analysts usually use to protect themselves from lawsuits. No, I do not buy that. There is absolutely no way. It is completely bogus. Lynette Hooker is still missing. Her remains haven't been found in waters where a local captain insists she should have washed ashore within just a few hours. The partner who told police she just bounced out and floated away was recently released from custody without facing any charges. Meanwhile, a veteran captain who knows these shallow channels intimately and was sailing those exact waters that very night, who easily swam that same distance in 2 hours, which Brian claims took 9, is standing on his vessel in Marsh Harbor, flatly stating that the husband's story does not hold water. This mystery is far from solved. Hit subscribe now, because with this cold case, every new development changes everything. This video is an analytical study, built purely from public records to keep you both informed and aware. This is not an official final ruling. Every person named is innocent until proven guilty in court. You should always check other outside sources yourself to get the entire true picture.